Minds touching minds. Telepathy is an experience many say they've had, but science isn't so sure. These twins say they talk to each other without words. A mother claims telepathy saved her twin child's life. This man's mind has been hired by the US government to try and spy by telepathy. Naked Science asks, are these all merely mind games? Or does telepathy really exist? Naked Science's inquiry into telepathy starts here, in New York City. Lisa and Debbie Gans run a promotional agency that claims many thousands of twins on the books, a rich source of unscientific yet fascinating anecdotes about telepathy.
Twins have so many stories of telepathy and feeling each other's pain and happiness. We have had
experiences.
Lisa was living in Australia.
I was living in Australia, halfway around the world.
And I was living in New York City.
And Debbie was living in New York. And I actually got in a serious car accident in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the outback.
On a dark, deserted road, Lisa's car hit a cow and spun out of control. Debbie, some 10,000 miles away, says she knew instantly her sister was in trouble.
I looked at my mother and I said, something's wrong.
There's this intangible feeling that you can't actually explain to other people. And even when I had the accident, before anybody had, contacted or we had gotten to somewhere we can make phone calls, she had already been calling all of my friends that lived in Sydney.
Did anyone talk to her? Because I never had such an intense feeling of somewhat like pain, but it wasn't my pain. It was her pain, so I couldn't verbalize it, so it must have been my sister.
It's a perfect example of when you call it, you have a sixth sense.
Even if we're not together, the experiences are shared through a connection that we can't explain.
So when Debbie goes out on a date and has a good time, then I just stay home and feel it.
Oh, that's really nice.
But can Debbie know for sure she reacted at the exact moment when Lisa was hurt? The Gans' stories can't be confirmed by science, and therefore don't offer satisfying evidence of actual telepathy. Lots of twins say they share experiences even when separated, such as getting identical marks on exams at school.
We were always accused of cheating on tests because the teachers would have our tests and they'd be like, well, you guys have the same answers, you guys have the same grades, even the multiple choice.
We'd write the same exact thing.
Could this be telepathy, or just simple coincidence? Or maybe even a natural result for two similar people in the same grade at school who live and study together? Anecdotes of twins that some may take as evidence of telepathy are rarely worthy of a second look. Perhaps a simple test for twins, 30 questions each on the differences between language in England and America would shed light. A professor of English, Marilyn Elkins, supervises the exam. She divides 3 sets of twins into separate rooms.
Here's the test. And commune silently in your head with the twin in the other rooms.
The Ashford twins believe they telepathically traded answers.
We would sit there and focus on what the other one might be thinking and how they would answer it and what would come to us from the other. And if I didn't know one, I'd like, okay, Alicia, you know this one, and I'd kind of say, I'm putting this, and she would put the same thing. So mentally, we were talking to each other.
Thank you. As a teacher, if they were in my classroom, I might have some concerns. I don't see that the tests are exactly alike, but there are some similarities that I might find questionable. The Najis had the most correct, and they certainly had one unusually similar guess. The Ashford twins had 10 the same correct, and then they had the same wrong answer twice on the exam, and that's when you get very suspicious.
Some results may seem suspicious, but they're not scientifically meaningful. With identical upbringings and similar brains, twins could be more likely to get similar scores. For a test like this to be meaningful, it requires scientific controls, experimental methods carefully designed to rule out other explanations. But for the most part, belief in telepathy relies not on real scientific research, but on the personal anecdotes of those who claim they experience it. Yet stories persist and seem compelling, especially to the twins who experience them.
It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We were asleep. I got up to use the restroom, and I ended up fainting. I hit my eye, and I probably was unconscious for about 20 minutes. And so I was knocked out asleep. And then when I was sleeping, all of a sudden I heard, Leisha, Leisha, Leisha. So I got up and I went to the bathroom and I found her laying there on the ground, and she had split her eye open really bad. So I woke her up, took her to the emergency room, but it was kind of amazing because I just knew something was wrong with her.
I started telling her this dream, and about midway through it, she started finishing it. I had the exact same dream. The only difference is it was reversed roles.
I got in a really, really major car accident, going 80 miles an hour on the freeway. I hit a stopped car, and she knew right away that something was wrong. What's wrong?
I actually felt pain here, and she broke
I broke
her
my sternum, and she felt pain in her chest.
Such selective stories are seized on by those seeking to believe, but mean little more to scientists than UFOs or alien encounters. People often interpret coincidence as telepathy. Is there a way to put anecdotes like these to a controlled test? What we've seen so far is how difficult testing for telepathy can be. We set up another demonstration, more structured this time. We take these English twins. One wired up to record his vital signs. The other blindfolded and waiting. Then comes a series of stimuli. What we saw was intriguing. What did the twins' reactions mean? Is this a sign of real telepathy? Naked Science is looking at telepathy, separating fact from fiction. So far, the most intriguing tales we've heard are those from identical twins. Yet no one has produced evidence that their experiences are anything more than mere coincidence. Take the case of 9-year-old Richard and Damien Powells. According to their mother, the twins have demonstrated signs of telepathy almost from the moment they were born. In fact, Anna Powell says telepathy saved Damien's life.
The first occasion was when they were 3 days old. I was feeding them both on my bed, and I put Damien to the side of me and settled him there while changing Richard. Richard started to cry, and then he started to scream. It looked like he was having a convulsion. His whole body started to shake. Then I did suddenly think, twins relay messages to each other, and as I looked down to make sure, he wasn't there. He'd rolled behind me into the other pillows, practically suffocated. He'd stopped breathing and his face was blue, and I had to give him mouth to mouth, resuscitate him. But if it hadn't been for Richard, I believe to this day Damien would be dead.
Was this telepathy at work? Powells thinks so.
I totally believe that is what they have, the boys between them.
The twin boys' school grades are similar. Their mom thinks they may even share each other's aches and pains.
When they were 3, Damien was complaining about his knee was aching, and it turned out to be Richard had a knee infection. The other major one was that Richard had really bad pains in his back and was crying with the pain. And it was Damien who had a shrunken kidney that they've discovered since.
Naked Science will attempt to monitor the twins for signs of telepathic communication. First, the boys will be widely separated to avoid physical communication. Then Damien will be subjected to a series of stimuli to see if his twin reacts.
polygraph now.
Richard is connected to a polygraph machine by Guy Heseltine, a member of the American Polygraph Association. A polygraph detects physiological changes to the body that are invisible to the eye, but can be charted from moment to moment.
Okay, this one's going to go around your stomach.
Separate belts at the top and bottom of the chest record changes in breathing. Results appear on the two blue lines at the top of the computer screen. Electrodes measure electrical conductivity across the surface of the skin, recorded in green on the computer screen. An armband measures pulse rate and also records any changes in blood pressure, the red line on the screen. Finally, Richard wears headphones to ensure that he doesn't hear what's taking place in the house during the trial. Downstairs, Damien concentrates on his absent twin by drawing his picture.
I'll draw him kicking the football.
He's a bit bored at the moment, isn't he?
Yes. Why did you do that for?
First, Damien is startled. Is it possible his reaction will trigger a reaction in his twin?
Just after the plates were dropped, it appears that there's an increase in the cardio activity, followed very closely by an increase in the skin resistance, which could well be significant.
Upstairs, Richard relaxes as Damien takes a second test. Blindfolded, he tries to find candy in a jar. He discovers to his shock that the bottom of the jar holds nothing but ice-cold water.
Oh, it's gone.
Richard appears unaffected, but moments later, the polygraph chart reveals him taking a deep breath. Blood pressure and pulse also show a sudden change.
During the test, the child here was caused to have quite a significant movement, also in line with a deep breath, which may well be significant to what was going on downstairs.
Finally, Damien is startled by a balloon being burst. And the polygraph records changes in twin Richard's vital signs.
Over all three experiments, there's some kind of reaction that the child has experienced up here on each of the three tests. It could be construed that those reactions are as a result of some kind of activity downstairs.
Damien's reactions appear to provoke a subconscious reaction in Richard. But can we draw any conclusions about telepathy from the test? Probably not. For one thing, some question using a polygraph machine to test for telepathy, period. The polygraph charts body functions, but these may not tell us what's really going on in the brain. And then there's the question of just how physically separate from each other the twins truly were. They were apart, but far from perfectly isolated from each other. The demonstration took place in a house, an old house. Richard behind two closed doors, up 2 flights of stairs, far away from his brother, but perhaps not far enough not to have heard something or felt vibrations from downstairs. Clearly, these aren't laboratory conditions. And what about the interpretation? In an unscientific demonstration like this, an experimenter can look for favorable results and overlook things that don't fit. It's easy to pick holes in such demonstrations. But could we up the ante and have more luck with a man who once attempted telepathy to spy on America's enemies abroad? Meet San Francisco's Joe McMoneagle, who claims to have telepathic powers over great distances and with people he's never even met. What's more, he was once hired to use his skill for Army intelligence. Joe McMoneagle says he can receive information from another mind. All he needs is the person's photograph. He's eager to take our telepathy challenge. According to McMoneagle, he first recognized what he says is his unusual gift while serving with the Army in Vietnam. Later, after reporting a near-death experience, he was recruited into a unique intelligence program. The military, hoping to find ways to use telepathy for spying, employed McMonagle as one of what they call their remote viewers. Hoping to witness McMonagle's skills in action, we asked British program researcher Rachel Curran to select a number of locations around San Francisco. She's never visited the Bay Area before, and her choices are random. McMonagle has not met Curran. Miles away, he'll work in a closed room trying to visualize a place she selects. Curran chooses 6 locations and photographs them. There's a yacht marina, a rock quarry, Dumbarton Bridge, Palo Alto Municipal Airport, Stanford University's football stadium, and a giant redwood tree. Duplicate sets of photos of each location are put into 2 sets of envelopes. Then they're given to a lawyer for safekeeping until McMonagle gets to work the next day.
I'm unlocking the locked drawer here, and I'm taking out these envelopes, which have been in the drawer here overnight, and no one else has had any access to this office during the time.
The lawyer picks 1 set of Curran's photos with a throw of a die. This random selection process ensures that neither Curran nor McMonagle can influence the selection.
So we're going to see what envelope to pick. Well, this is the one we chose.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Until she opens the envelope, Curran has no idea which location has been chosen. This ensures our researcher can't accidentally give away any secrets. Curran drives to the location in the photo. McMonagle will now try to describe what Curran is seeing. McMonagle works from the Palo Alto offices of Ed May, a former colleague and one-time director of McMonagle's psychic spy program. Neither man has any idea who Curran is or where in San Francisco she's going.
By 10:30 this morning, our target person named Rachel is at the site. And my question is, do you know her or have you ever met her in the past?
No, I haven't.
McMonagle will now try to connect telepathically with Curran. She will try to act as a beacon. He will try via remote viewing to see what Curran sees.
She is somewhere in the Bay Area of California. And what I'd like you to do now is just describe the surroundings in which she finds herself now.
Okay. Kind of a half arch. There's something dark about it. Like there's something kind of darkness.
McMonagle sets himself a 30-minute deadline to describe Rachel's surroundings. We'll return to see how accurate McMonagle's remote viewing proves to be. But meanwhile, we're visiting a laboratory that's trying to put a scientific stamp on its psychic research. A woman tries to open her mind to receive video images from a colleague in a sealed room many yards away. Could this experiment offer any evidence to show whether telepathy exists? So far, naked science has explored claims that certain twins appeared to react telepathically to each other, but that didn't provide us any answers. We're also following an experiment in which a man who once worked for the US government claims unique telepathic powers, a claim that still must be proved. But what experiments, if any, are being carried out under laboratory conditions? To find out more, we visit the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Here, scientists work on a version of an experiment known as the Ganzfeld test. It requires a volunteer to be deeply relaxed and almost asleep. Conducting this experiment is Dr. Paul Stevens. Stevens has worked at the university's parapsychology unit for almost a decade. While many doubt parapsychology can deliver reliable results, Stevens is trying to prove otherwise, and his work may provide just the insight we're after.
Let's go get the headphones. It's like a very mild sensory deprivation. You have a low-level red light, you're in a comfy chair, you listen to the hissing white noise sound. White noise is a uniform blend of all the different frequencies. When you listen to it, it sounds mostly like sort of radio static, or maybe a distant waterfall is a more poetic image. The idea is to get you to a state just as you're about to fall asleep. Your brain's very good at looking for patterns, so if you give it something that has no patterns in it, eventually it'll tune it out. What we're doing here is more like daydreaming rather than sleep dreaming.
Some 25 yards away, another volunteer, the sender, enters a sealed room and gets ready to try to transmit mental messages. A computer randomly selects a short clip of video and plays it over and over again. The sender's job is to transmit those images to the receiver. At first, the receiver's answers stray far from the mark. No telepathy here.
Running water into a pond. A lake thing. Sounds make me think of the TV when it's not working. In my flat in my living room. Lying on the sofa with a blanket over me.
It could just be chance, but gradually the receiver appears to focus in on the video's street images.
On a street with lots of cars and rain on an umbrella. I'm walking along a street, past a pub with cars going by. I see a red car now. Feet are going heavy, really heavy. Vague feeling of cars and a tank. Arms are clenched fists. Getting a blue car now. And the horns are beeping. Getting a black impression with red houses in the background.
The receiver's descriptions are intriguing, but there's more going on. Throughout the experiment, the sender has been hearing the receiver's voice describing what she's visualizing.
I think I'm seeing yellow lights. Getting a blue car now, and the horns are beeping.
When the description appears to match the video scene, the sender tries to transmit a telepathic burst of positive reinforcing thoughts to her partner. Each time she does this, she pushes an electronic key. The key records the exact moment those positive thoughts go out. Here's where the test gets interesting. The receiver has electrodes attached to her fingers. They detect any changes in the electrical conductivity of her skin. Sometimes, just when the sender hits the button, the receiver does seem to show a physiological reaction. Is it, in fact, a reaction to the sender's reinforcing thoughts? The results are far from 100%, but Stevens thinks there might be something there. The responses may seem significant, but are they?
It's a very small effect, but when you add it up all over all the people, over all the series, it does seem to be significant, and we can't find any other reason for it to be there other than there is some kind of signaling going on.
But can Stevens convince his skeptics? In experiments like these, believers in telepathy find positive results, but others performing the same experiments see nothing out of the ordinary. Nevertheless, during 56 telepathy experiments, Stevens saw indications that receivers sometimes respond to the positive reinforcement. When his results are published, Stevens thinks he'll prove his point. He knows he's fighting an upstream battle against a scientific community that remains extremely skeptical. Back in Northern California, McMonagle also knows that feeling. But his attempt to demonstrate his telepathic abilities marches on. 20 minutes in, and he says he's making progress in detailing the secret location he's been asked to describe.
You get a feeling like she had to park somewhere through a tunnel or something, or under an overpass. up a walkway of some kind under an overpass. And then there's an abutment, just like a high overhang. This is way up over her head.
From time to time, McMonagle's former colleague Ed May keeps him focused on Curran by showing him her picture. She's trying to act as a beacon, transmitting to McMonagle the receiver.
We have a garden. It's a formal garden. Formal garden's got paths, open area in the center, with trees. And there's some kind of a artwork, some kind in the center. But this artwork is very bizarre. It's set in gravel, stone.
McMonagle lists features he believes will be found at Curran's secret location. He concentrates hard for nearly half an hour. Finally, he says he's received some images. But how accurate will they prove to be?
You bet.
A private telephone call to the film crew establishes Curran's location. They don't tell McMonagle, but instead take him with them to where she's waiting. In an attempt to double-check the accuracy of McMonagle's description, May carries out a parallel test. While McMonagle goes to meet Curran, May tries to identify the location by matching McMonagle's notes with one of Curran's photographs.
My job is to examine each one of these sites and try to find the site that best matches what Joe McMonagle drew, what the Dumbarton Bridge looks like. Gravel and stone, redwoods is that tower. All right, now I go to work.
At the end of his remote viewing session, McMonagle wrote a series of pointers which he thought best described Curran's location.
Massive, heavy, high overhang. There's something large that Rachel, the outbound person, had to actually look up to see. So he gave some assessment of how big this thing is. Smooth, rough metal stone, this overhead, heavy, there's this kind of arch going up. Well. Let me eliminate one almost immediately. Building. Very.
Finally, May lays out the pictures in the order he thinks most likely.
This is the Dumbarton Bridge. This is a rock quarry. And this is Palo Alto Airport. Maybe the Redwood City Marina. State University Football Stadium. And Methuselah State Park. I think I'll go with this as a first place match. Number one, Dumbarton Bridge.
So using only McMonagle's notes and a second set of Curran's photographs, May chooses the bridge location. And that's just where McMonagle is heading.
Now I understand what I was getting.
The approach to the location runs through an underpass.
That's exactly what I was saying right there. That's exactly what I was getting.
Although his earlier description didn't match exactly, McMonagle believes he's in the right place. Curran is standing in a viewing area for the Dumbarton Bridge. McMonagle believes that his work is accurate. For him, that's no surprise. After all, it's not the first time he's done this sort of work. And in the past, the US government believed in him too. His job was to spy on the nation's enemies and to provide intelligence on vital military targets. McMonagle was part of the once top-secret Project Stargate. McMonagle says he and his colleagues pinpointed hidden military bases. Bases that were on the other side of the world. We've shown examples of what may be evidence of telepathy, and we've learned that appearances can be deceiving.
Half arch.
But now, Naked Science focuses on an ex-US intelligence operator who says he can describe a hidden location miles away. Joe McMonagle says he learned of his skills about 25 years ago. At the time, the intelligence community was seeking ways to harness telepathy to win the Cold War. November 4th, 1979. The hostage crisis in Iran. The start of a 444-day ordeal for an American administration desperate to bring the hostages home alive. The administration tries anything: conventional intelligence techniques, and an unusual asset: agents claiming telepathic powers. Continents away from Iran, this inconspicuous hut at Fort Meade, Maryland, housed the top-secret U.S. government telepathy project known as Project Stargate. It employed people who believed they could sense events thousands of miles away. The CIA termed their ability remote viewing. McMonagle says he worked as a remote viewer on the hostage crisis.
They called us in and presented us with literally hundreds of photographs and asked us to try to identify who the actual hostages were.
Next, McMonagle says the remote viewers tried to gather more information on the hostages and their situation.
Doing everything from targeting the condition of the hostages to trying to discover which rooms hostages were being held in, their medical condition, who the hostage takers were, how they were armed, what kind of weaponry was being used.
McMonagle claims that his team's descriptions were corroborated. The remote viewing team lasted for more than 2 decades after its inception, when the CIA heard of early telepathic experiments conducted by quantum physicist Hal Puthoff.
Suddenly, these people from the CIA came by and they said, "Well, have we been looking for you?" And I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, we've been investigating the rumors and the data that the Soviet Union has been involved in serious psychic research for well over a decade, spending lots of money. We have no way to evaluate this data. So we've been looking for an investigator that might look into this for us." I'm a physicist, a quantum physicist, and so the idea that there may be some aspect of scientific theory involving consciousness that had not yet made it into our physics lexicon, that was a challenge to me and an interest to me as a physicist.
Puthoff assembled a team to begin telepathy and remote viewing experiments for the CIA at Stanford Research Institute.
And our particular activity took place in a secure building located here, the radiophysics laboratory, and that's where most of our research took place.
Former remote viewers report that they tried to concentrate on another human mind, known by them as the beacon, at the target location.
It's like you've got a door between you and the scene. And it's like you poke a small hole through the door and you get a little glimpse, and you poke another hole through the door, and you get a little glimpse. Each hole is like a subliminal perception experiment. You view something quickly. You just keep poking, and eventually the door finally has enough holes in it that it kind of crumbles, and you get a pretty good view of the scene.
We don't know actually what's involved in the transmittal of the information in the beacon targets. There could be telepathy involved, where there's mind-to-mind communication between the person who's acting as the beacon and the remote viewer.
Obviously, this would require someone at the target site to act as a telepathic beacon. But using agents was difficult inside the Soviet Union. So the remote viewers came up with an unlikely solution. They dispensed with the use of the beacon minds and replaced them with nothing. They simply concentrated on the location's map coordinates. It was a major shift, from attempting telepathy to something perhaps better described as clairvoyance. But the remote viewers still believed they were getting results.
Making the jump from beacon to geographical coordinates is, you might say at the psychological level, an impossible jump. But our program was completely empirically driven. So if we saw a result, it didn't matter, we couldn't explain it, we had no idea how it worked. If we saw a result, we followed the data wherever it took us.
Viewers were asked to target a Soviet facility at Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. Putov claims the results were remarkable.
We carried out a remote viewing experiment over an hour or so, describing the layout of a facility, and finally ending up saying that the most striking feature of this site was a very large crane that rolled over the top of a building. In fact, the crane was so large that a man would only be half a wheel height. This is what, in fact, the site looks like. He was correct. There was a very large crane. It did roll over the top of a building.
But since the Semipalatinsk viewing was first made public, the accuracy of the remote viewing of the surrounding site has been criticized. But for McMoneagle, telepathy is a reality. So much so that he's turned it into a business, hiring his remote viewing services out to commercial companies.
Picture the following image. It's sort of like someone blindfolding you so that you're in a totally inky black place where you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's so black, and at some point, a flashbulb goes off, and it's absolutely brilliant. And you see an entire room filled with stuff. And you're in that inky black space again. And somebody's asking you, quick, tell me where you are. Can you explain it scientifically? No, I don't think we're there yet.
McMoneagle claims he was then given a real target. The National Security Council wanted to know more about what was happening inside a huge new building in the north of the Soviet Union at Severodvinsk, a port on the White Sea.
I was asked to describe what was going on under the roof of this building. And the image I had was of two very large cylinders being welded together. I saw canted missile tubes. I saw a unique drive system. And all of this was taking place next to a standard-sized submarine, which I found to be dwarfed next to the size of this one that was under construction. It was absolutely huge. The size, I guess, is being almost twice the size of a standard submarine.
He says he's the one who figured out that the building was in fact a submarine factory, even if it was half a mile from the sea with no waterway. According to McMoneagle, the proof came a few months later.
About 100 days later, big bulldozers showed up and started cutting a canal to the sea. And they launched the largest submarine in the world, which was the Typhoon-class submarine. They call it the beaver tail because it's so huge and wide in the rear. I actually was awarded a Legion of Merit, one of the highest peacetime awards that can be given in the military. And I received the Legion of Merit predominantly for my remote viewing. And this is what the Legion of Merit looks like.
Despite McMoneagle's claims, many remain skeptical of remote viewing. In 1995, the CIA commissioned a report on the program. One of its authors criticized parts of the unit's experimental methodology. He concluded that there was no proof that effects that had been observed were the result of remote viewing. The report found no evidence that remote viewing was operationally useful. In fact, they found no proof that it gathered military intelligence effectively. After running for over 20 years, the remote viewing program was officially closed down. Since Project Stargate was terminated, scientists have continued to research the possible existence of telepathy. Some now believe they have found evidence indicating which part of the brain might be stimulated in an experiment testing for telepathy. There's one more place to look. Naked Science delves deep into the nerve centers of the human brain in search of telepathy. The average human brain has 100 billion neurons. It's capable of storing memories of places, people, sensations, and thoughts for a lifetime. But can it transmit those thoughts by telepathy? Naked Science asks, if telepathy does exist, what can the brain tell us about it? Seeking answers, we go to Bastyr University near Seattle, Washington, dedicated to the study of natural medicine and alternative health. Researchers here are attempting to measure what is going on in the brains of people trying to communicate by telepathy. In this case, their mother and daughter. The experiment starts by placing each in a separate and secure room. Each is fitted to an EEG machine that measures electromagnetic brainwaves. It's basically a cap with electrodes that pick up waves from various parts of the skull. Yorga, the sender, is going to attempt to relay telepathic signals to her daughter Ingrid, the receiver, in the next room. Conducting gel is squirted onto the scalp to help the electrodes pick up signals from the brain. Before the experiment starts, both Yorga and Ingrid are told to relax by meditating. The Bastyr researchers believe that this gets the brain into the so-called alpha state, the brain's relaxed, reflective state. Then the mother, the sender in the next room, receives a simple visual stimulus to her brain, a checkered pattern which suddenly changes. The tiny blip on the lower lines of the EEG trace represents the time when the checkered pattern changes. 100 milliseconds later, the daughter's brain appears to show activity. Could it be her response to the checkerboard movement next door? Has the visual stimulation of the mother's brain really provoked a reaction in her daughter's brainwaves? Are these two events random coincidence, or could they be related? Statistical analysis of scores of tests indicate that for a few people, the effect may be more than random chance. Scientists here now accept the possibility that some receivers' brains inexplicably react to another unconnected mind 30 feet away. Research Associate Professor Clark Johnson was initially skeptical of the results.
I've been one of our major skeptics here in this group. We'll get results and I just say, it just can't be right. Let's keep looking here. And I've run out of ways of convincing myself that we've made any mistakes. I can't find any right now.
The experiment is repeated, this time with a receiver inside an MRI scanner. Will she once again react milliseconds after the checkerboard pattern changes? The MRI images suggest that this area at the back of some receivers' brains, the part that registers visual input, is being stimulated. It could be no more than coincidence, but if this really is an indication of telepathy, could this part of the brain be reacting to telepathic signals? Back in San Francisco, the beacon and the receiver finally meet.
Lovely to meet you, Joe.
Okay.
How successful has McMonagle been in describing her location?
At 10:30 a.m., I started off with a half arch. I said it was a passage that went into an area that was curved on one side, and I had a tunneling effect. Very dark on the right-hand side. This is a way into wherever you were going.
Yes.
I had big, heavy material with a high overhang. I said it was like a bridge overhang or an abutment of some kind. I kept getting the overhang and the abutment. Very heavy abutment, yeah. And that kept throwing me off because the passage was everything about it. I took a break here. And I had some kind of a ground pattern, and it was a clearing, an open area, very smooth, set in gravel or stone. My sense was that it was nothing, which basically we're standing in nothing. And what happens then, in a lot of cases, you have a tendency to start inventing things.
McMonagle genuinely believes he's got many elements of the location correct. But have his statements been retrofitted after the fact? It may be that McMonagle describes the scene so generally that it could fit many different locations.
At 10:30 a.m.
Let's rewind for a moment. First, McMonagle drives through the underpass.
That's exactly what I was seeing right there. That's exactly what I was getting. Now I understand what I was getting.
McMonagle believes he's successfully described Curran's final journey to the target and her immediate surroundings. Yet he has failed to mention or identify the actual target itself, Dumbarton Bridge.
This is a classic remote viewing because some of it's very on and some of it's not so on.
Yeah.
And what of our secondary experiment with May? We can rewind on that one too. Using a second set of pictures gave no clue to May about which envelope to choose. But without the controls of a full scientific experiment, we can't be certain. And his choice could have been no more than pure coincidence. We must also take into account the bizarre artwork McMonagle described.
It was a work of art here, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And I think maybe those pictures.
It could be those pictures.
That kept getting me though. It's defining the work of art.
I know.
The question is, can we accept any evidence from McMonagle's efforts to find Curran? Sadly not. This experiment doesn't meet the key criteria to make it scientifically solid. It's not controlled, measurable, or repeatable.
See what envelope to pick.
Science aside, common sense also raises some concerns. Curran and her selection of sites are probably not truly random. Perhaps another person would pick sites not unique to the area, like a parking lot or a church. And perhaps McMonagle just got lucky by painting a general picture that could refer to a number of very different structures. We remain unconvinced that this experiment offers any proof that telepathy exists. And what about the other demonstrations? Unusual phenomena that seem to bend the rules of scientific reason. Twin boys who could be responding to each other. Fascinating, but inconclusive. Young women studied under laboratory conditions.
On a street with lots of cars.
Scientists disagree on whether the reactions are significant or coincidental. Former intelligence agents challenged to remotely sense a secret location, a success or not. Mother and daughter, their brains appearing to respond within milliseconds, telepathy or wishful thinking. And while some evidence may appear to be significant, it's most likely to be nothing more than coincidence. Even if we accepted it, no one can tell us how it works or why. For naked science, telepathy gets a thumbs down. Until there is incontrovertible data, it must remain on the fringes. Fascinating, yes, but a real science?